I am Christopher Peter and welcome to the CRC Review. The CRC Review continues to provide common sense commentary on our public policy, national economy, and society. The CRC Review continues to bridge the gap in a divided society. In this podcast, I am going to build on my previous discussion about the state of our society with a focus on how we are being governed. In our current state, I focused on where we are as a society given our fight against a global pandemic and experience with a tragic episode of racism. I will provide a common sense perspective on how America should be governed. Additionally, I will talk about leadership. Real leadership. We will wrap our discussion talking about the driving force behind our recent economic boom and the right effort to remove antitrust protection from Major League Baseball for the wrong reasons. So let us begin. Part of understanding how America should be governed is understanding the nation Americans generally want. A far-left progressive liberal might want a drastically different society than a self-reliant conservative. But there are common aspects that we all agree on. All Americans want communities that are safe for their families. Communities that afford fair treatment and equal protection under the law. Americans respect diversity but do not want to be judged by the color of their skin or gender, rather the content of their character. Americans want opportunity far more than they desire a handout. Many Americans just desire a fair shot to succeed or fail on their own merit, not on cronyism or poor public policy. Americans want our nation to be secure from the real threats existing in this world. Americans want fair immigration and fair treatment of those who qualify for as dreamers. Most importantly, Americans want freedom and a return to a level of normalcy. Many Americans probably are not a fan of how our government has operated for quite some time. The appeal of Joe Biden was the potential for our American government to once again function in the shared best interest of the American people. Part of Joe Biden's half of a century in government took place in an era where our elected officials worked across the aisle to enact legislation that reflected our shared interests and values. For the last two administrations, the trend of one-party government was the norm, starting with the Obama era, where political opponents started to be viewed as obstacles not worthy of acknowledgement rather than the elected representatives of fellow Americans. The promise of the Biden era was the hope of lowering the temperature, as he likes to say, and head back to governance that is both productive and considerate of all Americans. America is the United States of America, not the red states of America nor the blue states of America. The first 100 days of a presidential administration is a symbolic view of how a regime might operate. To this point in the Biden era, there is reason for concern in his approach towards governance. First and foremost, Biden made it clear to all Americans that his words are not tied to his ways. Being a president of all Americans should involve operating a government genuinely representative of the wide spectrum of political views to some degree, rather than viewing political opponents as an existential threat. Passing a bloated spending bill strictly across party lines should be concerning regardless of what party one is registered with. Not an achievement by any means. Especially when you see some of what is contained in it. Biden is an establishment politician to the core. Biden wants to associate himself with achievements made by the American society despite his leadership flaws. The vaccination success is more of a Trump administration success story than anything Biden did. Bringing vaccines in a safe and expedited manner was the work of Operation Warp Speed, a feat that Biden and Harris frequently criticized. Should not be surprising that there is hesitancy with the vaccine when a ticket of a major party behaved the way they did during the campaign. The Trump administration brought key partners together and eliminated redundancies and unnecessary roadblocks to ensure a safe and effective vaccine came to the market in time to change our course with the pandemic. Americans should be concerned about the resurgence of issues at our southern border and with our critical enemies. The short-sighted approach in simply reversing Trump's policies made America less safe. The Biden administration is normalizing radical power grabs in the court-packing scheme, DC statehood, and pending election reform. America needs to protect our democracy in the face of an agenda resembling Soviet-style governance. How do we move towards where America really needs to be? The hardest part in changing direction is filtering through the noise to identify solutions that are effective, efficient, and address the issue at hand. Some push for what they deem are new ideas. Ideas that may be new to them, but not to the millions negatively impacted by the recycled policies. Some want to avoid any change in approach, but there may be needs to implement temporary solutions. A level of political courage is needed to push back against the ideologues pushing for their respective agendas. America needs leaders willing to defend bipartisanship and counter the radical narrative that political opponents are an existential obstacle. Bipartisanship protected Americans for generations from the worst leanings of each political party. Removing Senate rules, limiting consideration for amendments, and now fighting the filibuster will do grave harm to our society. Americans needs leaders that will embrace free market capitalism and understand the need for reasonable regulation. Government's role requires it to ensure fair play in our markets and society. Government needs to hold bad actors accountable but should not operate on the assumption that every individual is a bad actor. Perspective is important in leadership roles. Being able to speak to the realities and facts of situations instead of pandering to the emotions of the moment is needed. For example, a leader does not lower the temperature in our current environment by claiming America is racist or that racism is a myth. Rather, a real leader would speak to the reality that racism unfortunately exists, and our nation does not stand for it, and crimes committed as a result will be prosecuted. Racism is not ingrained in the fabric of our society, rather the result of a few individuals. Most Americans from all backgrounds seek unity, harmony, and justice. A real leader understands that discrimination is not a one-direction experience, that hate in all its forms is unacceptable. Violence in all its forms is unacceptable. A real leader calls for the nation to understand that bad actors in our law enforcement community will be prosecuted, but law enforcement is a vital institution in our society that needs to be respected and properly funded. Americans need real leadership that is willing to buck the trend of one-party government and political pandering in favor of truth. Americans did not see real leadership in Biden's address to Congress, rather a stunning example of what rigid ideological obedience wrapped in political marketing. In that address, America saw the prototypical political speak large on emotion but lacking substance. For example, Biden addressed the many women that find themselves out of work due to the pandemic. The pandemic may be the underlying reason, but the larger piece of the puzzle is the fact that teachers' unions steadfastly prevent many districts from reopening schools. Like it or not, many women serve as the primary caregiver of their children. If the child is home, the mother usually needs to be home if there are no other options available. Due to COVID, many child care options outside the home also were restrictive. The obvious answer is getting schools to reopen. Not because of politics, but because the science stated for a long time now that schools can reopen. If Biden genuinely wants a more united America, he needs to foster a greater level of bipartisanship and facilitate discussion between leaders of both parties to ensure legislation passed by our elected officials are balanced. Good legislation is not enacted under threat of a fabricated crisis, but under deliberate negotiations where both sides find a compromise reflective of the spirit of all Americans. As Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina so eloquently stated, that the GOP is willing to work across the aisle. Work together to find common ground on big pursuits like infrastructure. There has not really been much of an olive branch. Biden seeks to usher in a troubling era in American history with a radical agenda that will cost American taxpayers a great deal and provide them with little benefits. Biden bears the burden of leading America towards a more united society, if he so chooses to. But Biden seems more focused on solidifying political power for his party than empowering the voters and workers that make our nation great. If Biden wants a more united nation, he needs to show an unwavering support to the principles of bipartisanship and the protocols that protect it, like the filibuster, with actions, not just empty words. Moving on to our economy. Americans have more reason to be hopeful that we are getting past the pandemic to some degree. Recent economic reports show our economy experienced a strong rebound as our GDP grew by 6.4%. While stimulus spending can be helpful, the driver of this growth was efforts by states like Texas, Florida, and others that pushed forward with reopening their states despite the skeptics going to great lengths to keep America closed. While politicians will aim to take credit for this rebound, the economy is being driven by the people. Our economy allows the people to persevere despite the poor public policy being implemented by our government. America is entering another era where the people will drive the economic performance. Americans must understand that free market capitalism is what really contributed to America being able to make it out of the dark days of the pandemic. Not our government. Although the federal coordination under Trump and the continued stimulus helped, our vibrant private sector rarely gets the credit it deserves for provide the tools needs to overcome our challenges. The testing apparatus, vaccine discovery, and treatment options were all possible because private and public sectors could collaborate to bring solutions faster than the nations with socialized medicine. Americans need to understand that our free market capitalism system is an asset, not an anchor. Socialism never worked. Not then, now. Let us discuss the effort to remove antitrust protections from Major League Baseball. No organization should be shielded from competition, other than during an initial period after a discovery of a new product or service, but not in perpetuality. Major League Baseball should not be protected from competition. That said, Major League Baseball should not lose its protection simply for exercising its voice for the wrong reasons. Like many rational people, I disagreed with baseball's decision to move the All-Star game from a predominantly black city to a predominantly white city simply because a state extended early voting and enacted protections against potential voter fraud. The narrative driven by the press is that laws enacted to protect the vote are racist and restrict voting. In reality, there are no real restrictions other than requiring a voter ID, which many blue states required. Personally, I experienced the direct need for voter ID as someone signed under my name numerous times to cast ballots. If voter ID are already existing state-issued identification like driver licenses or federal-issued passport or identification card, there are no real issues. Their argument is highly flawed as many voters in Democratic strongholds already vote under these conditions with no issue. Many of these rules were instituted by Democratic leaders. That said, there should not be retaliation because Major League Baseball takes an unreasonable and uneducated position. Government should not punish people or companies for political reasons. In the same breath, companies might be better served to stay out of politics. Finally, as you might have already on my blog, the NFL Draft is one of the genuinely great spectacles in all of sports. Millions of people tune in to see which one of the plethora of mock drafts correctly identified the player their respective team selected. After every selection, the media pundits heft great praise on how much potential this player has for this team, even after calling out a player's weakness earlier to justify another selection. Every player and team will say the right statements. The player will profuse gratitude on the opportunity ahead of them, and the team selecting them was the one they wanted all along. The team drafting the player will say the individual player selected was the target all along, even if fans see another team jump ahead of them and they subsequently trade back. We all hope the players can perform and shine in the NFL, fans get competitive football games the subsequent seasons, and the Dallas Cowboys continue to struggle. The NFL Draft has a great and immediate impact on our favorite teams in a way not comparable in any other sport. If your favorite basketball team drafts a player in the same position as their current star, they may be wasting a pick, but there is the possibility both players can coexist and be contributing to a successful team. In baseball, there is no reason for the current roster to worry about draft picks for at least 2 seasons as the prospects work their way through the minor leagues. In the NFL, the draft decisions provide fans a near certain glimpse of what their team is going to do in the coming months or the following year with a star. From a player's perspective in any league with a draft, think about the stress surrounding the uncertainty these individuals must experience considering the lack of choice. Players choose which of the colleges recruiting them they will attend. For professional athletes, the choice of where to work and who to work for is delayed for possibly 5 years. Sure, players could hold out and re-enter the following draft losing a year of earnings and possibly dropping rounds, thus further reducing earnings. They wait months to determine where their career will start. Hopefully, the young men selected in this year's NFL Draft have long productive careers. Hopefully, the NFL teams can utilize their talents to provide us great entertainment as society moves past the pandemic and can pack the stadiums. In closing, I thank you for experiencing the CRC review and encourage you to explore the additional original content available.